This week, CNN released a slew of battleground polling. There was so much information inside, but one thing was missing. One big thing. CNN senior data reporter Harry Enten, who is with us now. I'm not sure I've ever been happier to see you here.
I'm not sure I've ever been happier to be with you, Mr. Berman.
This race is close.
Yes.
Harry. Historically close.
Historically close. You know, I just want to sort of zone out a little bit, go to 35,000 feet, and just point out how close this race has been consistently close. All right, campaigns where any candidate led by at least 5 points in the polls. Look, most of the time there's at least some stretch where one of the candidates is ahead by at least 5 points. At least 3 weeks in which one candidate led by at least 5 points. That happened in every single campaign from 1964 to 2020. How many days have we had this campaign where one candidate was ahead by at least 5 points nationally? Look at this. 0 days. 0 days. The fact is this race has been consistently tight in a way that we have never seen before, Mr. Berman.
This is always versus never.
Correct.
That's the difference between this campaign and every other campaign we've seen for the last 75 years or so. All right, the battleground polls that we're looking at. Give us some perspective on how close they are.
You know, sometimes we look at these 7 close states and, you know, you see all these numbers that are up there and you go, I can't make heads or tails of it. So I just want to sort of combine them and look at the Democrat versus Donald Trump in those 7 closest battleground states. Look at the 2020 final margin and average across these 7 states. It was Biden plus 0.9 points. You don't think that could get any closer? We can, in fact, get closer. Look right now, Kamala Harris up, but get this, by just 0.6 points on average. Only about half a point, 0.6 of a point. My goodness gracious. That is how tight we are talking right now across these 7 battleground states. It is a race, Mr. Berman, that is well within the margin of error when you look across these 7 key battleground states that will determine this election.
Now, you look at this and you go, 0.3%. They're basically the same. But you're talking about actual vote margins that were so small. So show us the difference that a polling margin can make.
All right, so let's just say the polls match up perfectly to what the results end up being. Kamala Harris would win this election with 292 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 246. But let's just say we move the current polls, and let's say the result differs by them by a single percentage point, and Donald Trump is the beneficiary of it. Look at this. If Trump outperforms his current polls by just a single point, you take that Kamala Harris win, and look at this. Donald Trump gets 287 electoral votes because the bottom line is Pennsylvania would flip up here, and you would also get this flip out in Nevada over here. And that, my friends, is what we're talking about. We are talking about the closest campaign in a generation where a single point could make all the difference in the world. John, this is a truly exciting race right now where any slight movement can make all the difference in the world.
And even more exciting because you are here with us.
Thank you, John.
As we've been noting this morning, we're just 2 months out from the election. The first ballot's set to be mailed out this afternoon, and this race is so incredibly close. CNN's latest polling shows an incredibly tight race across 6 battleground states, and it is closer. It is so close in Pennsylvania. It is the closest of these contests. The Keystone State, of course, the biggest prize for both campaigns. Trump and Harris both at 47% in our battleground poll. Pennsylvania, also one of the keys to the Senate. Incumbent Democrat Bob Casey is polling, according to this, tied with Republican challenger Dave McCormick. Here was Democratic vice presidential candidate Tim Walz, who was campaigning in Erie, PA yesterday, taking a page from the state's popular Democratic governor.
It's very clear that our opponents in this race see the world differently. Now, I'm going to quote, which I think is a brilliant quote, by your great governor, Josh Shapiro. He often says, and I hear him say this, whenever Donald Trump's talking about America, he's talking America. He does not believe in the promise of America, and he continues to put this country down.
Now is CNN political commentator Michael Smerconish. He is the host of CNN's Smerconish. Michael, wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Let's talk about Pennsylvania. I mean, honestly, we could probably do every political segment from here until Election Day on Pennsylvania, because at the end of the day, it might be the entire ball game. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What do you think it's going to come down to here?
So to your point about the good to see you, by the way. Thank you, Casey, for having me back. To your point about just how close the race is, Real Clear Politics, as of this moment in time, says 47.2 to 47.2 in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It can't get much more close than that. Tim Walz, Governor Walz, why is he in Erie? Because Erie, as you well know, is one of those bellwethers. If you win Erie, Pennsylvania, you're going to win the Commonwealth. And if you win the Commonwealth, chances are you're going to win the presidency. Can I put on your radar the concern that I have about where this is all going? Because the pre-canvassing process doesn't begin until 7 a.m. on Election Day. They can't touch those mail-in ballots until that morning at 7 a.m. This is one of the reasons why in 2020, you'll remember, Wolf Blitzer called the race the Saturday after the election. And I'm really concerned that if it's, in the end, as close as people envision, and if it comes down to Pennsylvania, that we could have a process where there's a window of ballot counting where a lot of disinformation, misinformation is spread, not only by domestic forces, political parties, one perhaps more than the other, but look at what the Russians and the Iranians are up to. There's like this perfect storm that's brewing. And if I'm hoping for one thing as we are 9 weeks out, it's that there be a decisive outcome one way or the other so that we're not having to pick up the pieces and figure out who's telling the truth.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, what do you think the likelihood is of that at this point? I mean, candidly, when Biden was at the top of the ticket, this race was increasingly becoming not a close one. It seemed clear that Trump was on track to win. That's not the case now. And we've heard Trump start to use some of the language that, honestly, it has echoes to what we heard him saying back in 2020 as that week basically was unfolding between Election Day and that call on Saturday. And yeah, I barely slept that week, as I'm sure you didn't too, as we were all covering it. There are definitely some signposts that show that we may be facing a period where, again, it's not just people on the outside, but potentially one of the major candidates themselves.
Totally. And I think that it becomes incumbent upon all of us in the media, those of us with platforms, to educate the public about the fact that if there's not a decisive outcome that night, it doesn't mean that there's been shenanigans involved. We remember the red mirage and the blue wave, right? Because so many more Democrats were voting by absentee ballot in that 2020 cycle, and many of us tried to educate people, don't go looking at the initial returns as they come in that Tuesday night and think that's the victor, because this thing is going to have to play itself out. I don't think there'll be as much mail-in voting in this cycle as that cycle, because that was the pandemic. I might be wrong, because more Republicans are now receptive to voting by mail. But this is a really important issue, and I think that for the next several weeks, the media need to be talking about it so that people understand and are prepared to watch these events play out.
Michael, since you are so focused on Pennsylvania and we could all be watching it on election night, you mentioned a red mirage. Are we going to see a red mirage, a blue mirage initially out of Pennsylvania?
I think that we could see a red mirage because more will probably be Democrats who are waiting and voting by mail, Republicans who are doing so old school, showing up on Election Day. So the initial burst, there's going to come that moment 9 weeks, I guess, from this past Tuesday when we're watching CNN and there will be the big board and John King's going to be standing in front of that map. Just wait, hang in until the events play out. And by the way, one other thing, and it's Pennsylvania focused, what does this all mean if it's really 47.2 to 47.2? It means that Tuesday night is damn important. And by the way, where's that debate taking place? In Pennsylvania.
Obviously. And where is Kamala Harris parked? Pittsburgh, while she prepares. Michael Smerconish, so grateful to have you.
अस्सलामुअलैकुम दोस्तों, मेरा नाम मुशर्रफ है और मैं चारकानी वाले में रहता हूँ जो मैं सुपर के लिए मसला है। मेरी जो एजुकेशन है वो मैं आपको बताता हूँ। मैंने मैट्रिक को कहाँ स्कूल से की, यहाँ से एफएससी ग्लोबल स्कूल से कॉलेज से। उसके बाद मैं मास्टर की डिग्री के लिए चला गया साइंस। वहाँ मैंने जिस यूनिवर्सिटी से मैंने अपनी डिग्री कंप्लीट की, तो उसके बाद एक साल में बेला रहा हूँ। उसके बाद अब मैंने शॉपिफाई स्टार्ट करा। शॉपिफाई 4-5-6 साल दिन हो गए, हमारे टिकटॉक वाले वो नहीं आ रहा, अकाउंट ही नहीं आ रहा, मैं एक्सेस नहीं ले रही। सारे लोग हमें ताने दे रहे थे ना, उसके ऊपर शुक्र करते हो। बस इसी में वो मैं पता नहीं कब आया, अल्लाह जल्दी शुरू करा दे। We are going to start and Pakistan news channel which is running इधर